in the morning, since the sun high in the sky, who would hide from heaven's glory, who would pass the challenge by? La 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 la.
There's a morning for every nation when the sun's high in the sky. There's a time for every people to affirm their destiny. La 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 la
Even so, all of us together can create a better land. Leave the past, a new tomorrow waits for all who understand. There's a morning for every nation when the sun's high in the sky. There's a time for every people to affirm their destiny. La 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 la. Even so, all of us together can create a better land. Leave the past, a new tomorrow waits for all who understand. La 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 la. Leave the past, a new tomorrow waits for all who understand.
Good morning. I'd like to begin with a reading from Whispers from Eternity, which is Master's Book of Prayer Poems. Demand for union with the Almighty. Again, Master's prayers are given in the form, many of them, of demands. He's saying just as a child can demand rightly of its parents, so similarly we can demand of God with love. O Father, behold me through the pores of the sky. Smile at me through the twinkling stars. Strengthen me through the sun. Calm my feelings through the moon. Caress me through the breeze. Love me through my love. Throb in me through my heart. Breathe thine immortality through this mortal frame of mine. Speak through my voice. Help others through my hands. Use my mind to inspire them. Breathe through my breath. For within this fragile voil, thou alone canst sing thy complete eternal song. I think it's viol. I said voil, but I think it's viol. As in, I don't know if it's viol. Does anyone know the word viol? V-I-O-L, not viol like a little tiny thing. Yeah, it's V-I-O-L. Because you don't sing through a viol. I mean, I don't think so, but yeah. Master used a word, I said voil, I think, because I got confused. He used a word noil in the autobiography of a yogi, which I think means great noise, but I'm not sure actually now. So he used the word noil, N-O-I-L, and his editor said, that's not a word. He said, yes it is, look it up in the dictionary. And so she looked it up in the dictionary and it wasn't there. And so she looked in an older dictionary, and then finally she found one from the 1600s where the word noil was in there. And so it was when he was speaking English at an earlier time. This week's reading is from Rays of the One Light by Swami Kriyananda, which are parallel commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. Truth is one and eternal. This week's reading, The Inner Kingdom. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. Many people imagine that the inner kingdom, as Jesus described it, lacks the fascination they attribute to sense... Okay. I better start again. Most people imagine that the inner kingdom, as Jesus described it, lacks the fascination they attribute to sense life. The bright lights, the diverse attractions, the joys and the laughter. Little do they realize what a vast universe exists in their own selves. There are many passages in the Old and New Testaments of the Bible that describe aspects of this inner kingdom. In the book of Genesis we read, "And the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil." This garden was in no earthly place. It exists even now in the very self of every human being. The legend of Adam and Eve is allegorical. It describes how the first human beings dissipated their spiritual energy centered in the spine. The spine is the channel through which flows the river of baptism and of spiritual life. The Bhagavad Gita tells us the wise speak of an eternal Ashvata tree with its roots above and its branches below. The tree of life, spoken of also in Genesis, is the spine. Its roots are above in the brain's energy. Its branches are the outward spreading nervous system. When the sap, which is to say the energy, flows downward, the consciousness is drawn into delusion. On the other hand, when the energy is drawn upward in deep meditation, the consciousness is drawn toward its eternal source, God, and is at last united with Him. Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita therefore urges his chief disciple Arjuna to embrace the yoga science, the path of meditation. The yogi, he says, is greater than the ascetic, greater even than the followers of the paths of wisdom, Jnana Yoga, or of action, Karma Yoga. Be thou, O Arjuna, a yogi. For those who would find the divine truth, Krishna gives this description of the yogi. Steadfast a lamp burns, sheltered from the wind. Steadfastly meditating, solitary, such is the likeness of the yogi's mind. Shut from sense storms and burning bright to heaven. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om. I was smiling when I was reading these different passages from the Gita because it's wonderful how clear Krishna's counsel is on these things. You know, in some scriptures we read them and then we have to read sort of commentaries to even understand what's being said, or we need to read background information to say, well, you have to understand in this day and age when people talked about this, it meant this. So, for example, Jesus talked to his listeners a lot about salvation, and part of it was because they were under the rule of foreign people. They were either imprisoned by the Egyptians in earlier times, or they were imprisoned, they were over the rule of the Romans, so it made perfect sense to talk about political freedom even. And so he used that, which would make sense, calling it salvation. But of course he was speaking of a much greater salvation. He wasn't just speaking of, listen, we'll get free and then we'll have our own nation state. He was saying we'll get free completely. Now, of course, you can say, well, but isn't that obvious? Well, depending on what you've been raised with, certain things are obvious and certain things are less obvious. But we have to also ask ourselves, if we can look back on those teachings with such clarity of mind, what are the people in the future thinking about us right now? You know, watching us going around like this, you know, still using electricity. You know, in other words, it's so easy when you look back and think, oh, all those things they didn't know, they didn't even have iPods. And then all you have to do is look ahead and then say, okay, what's coming? The happy news is we don't have to wait for the next advance of iPods. I don't know, is it J-Pods or something? I don't know. I don't know what will be next, but we don't have to worry about that to come in order for us to get liberated. We can get free even now. You can get free in the darkest of times. One of the advantages, someone was sort of, I don't know how to put it. She wasn't quite complaining about having to take human birth and wasn't quite complaining about this human existence, but was sort of like, at one point she did say something like, well, I will love God through my service if that is the way in which He wishes me to love Him. The sense of exhaustion. And I said, well, there might also be a sense of expanding joy as well. And she said, oh, I think I might be missing some of that. We can get to a certain point in our spiritual life or in our outer life where we're just going through the motions and we're either exhausted or we're burned out. Burned out is usually the phrase for everything. Just burned out. Why burned out? What burns us out? What does it even mean to be burned out? It usually means our nerves are burned out, that they're like a match that has been burned to a crisp, that we are overstimulated. In other words, we've had too much stimulation, we've had too much working too hard for too long, or we've had too many exhausting thoughts. You know how you can just sit quietly and have a thought, I didn't like the way he said that, I didn't like the way he said that, I didn't like the way he said that. I didn't like the way he said, I need a nap. Nothing happened. It's not like we're lifting weights or running around. We're just sitting there thinking, I didn't like the way he said, I didn't like the way he said that. We can exhaust ourselves just this way. Now, granted, there's other factors involved too. Sometimes when we have a negative interaction with somebody, it's not just us dwelling on it or us not liking the way he said it, but sometimes there's even some kind of a residue, some kind of a energetic sort of debris that's left with us, especially if the person is continuing to think about it and going, I said it the way I said it, I said it the way I said it, back at us. So that depends on how sensitive you are, and if you're not sensitive, don't desire to be. And if you're too sensitive, don't be proud of it. Oh, I'm so sensitive. Master said, I want you to be tough. It's good to have that sensitivity because really it's a level of higher awareness. If we're aware of what sort of the emotional undertone of a situation, if we're aware of what others are feeling, it makes us better able to help them. And that way you can talk to somebody, and even though they're acting like everything's perfectly fine, you might pick up on some kind of a disturbance, and that might make you more attentive. It might help you to listen more, even because if they seem fine, you might sort of distractedly just go off on your way. And on the other hand, if somebody is really full of negativity and unhappiness and is really just having a bad life, then, you can tune into that too much. We can be tempted to tune into that too much. And then suddenly my life isn't so great either. I mean, it was a minute ago, but now I think it's not. And so we don't want to pick up on that. It's better in that case, in order to protect yourself, to be in a giving mode. To pray for the person, to bless the person, to think of some way you might be able to cheer them up, think of some way they might be able to make them laugh, or else just say, Divine Mother, I see this person will be a saint in some amount of time, and so we'll think of them as a saint even now. And isn't it funny, remember when we met all those times and you spilled the coffee and we're so mad and now you're a saint? Ha ha ha. In other words, we'll all look back on these things and laugh. But remember also, sometimes you can just enjoy God's comedy. Nayaswami Haridas, who most of you know, is the leader of Ananda Sangha Bangalore with his wife Nayaswami Roma. He said he had an aunt, I've forgotten her name. What was her name? Oh dear. Aunt Celia, I think. Aunt Celia, who was so negative she was positive. That's the way he described her. And so I don't know exactly what that means, but I can imagine, like, he can say something like, would you like any ice cream? And then she would say, no, I don't want any ice cream. It's bad for my throat. And he'd say, okay. And then she'd say, why didn't you offer me any ice cream? And then everybody would laugh because it's like Aunt Celia. So anyway, I don't know. But think about that. You might meet some people who are so negative they're positive. Now that has two meanings too. One is they're so negative you're just enjoying the comedy. Like, let's see what you can find wrong with this. You just won 10 lakhs. Think of all the taxes I'm going to have to pay on 10 lakhs. So in other words, you might just like, excellent, good, I didn't think of that. So you can enjoy that negativity, or because it's also a way of keeping some distance from it. Another way, though, to think of someone as so negative that they're positive is a more serious thing. You can often feel with people that, if it's true, that they have a good heart underneath. Now, everybody essentially, in their essence, has a good heart. And so even if the heart's a little confused at the moment, it is, thinking like, I'm getting a lot of good use out of this machine gun. And so there's some work that needs to be done. So it's not that some people have good hearts and some people don't. But when someone does have a good heart, you can feel it and you can sense it. In a way, it often is disarming. Even if they're difficult, even if they're a troublemaker, you can feel, no, but they have a good heart. If you can feel that, it helps you a lot. I had a student who just when there was a problem, he decided to solve it with a punch in the face or whatever to the other kid. And in the beginning, of course, someone would go, I was a school teacher. I should just clarify that you don't think it's like a level 1 class or something like that. So, he hit me. And so, of course, the natural, why did you hit him? But after a few, repeats of this event, then I realized, he's always provoked. So the kid's like, he hit me in the face. And it's why? It's, why did he hit you? Why did you hit him? It's because he said my parents were worms. Like, oh, I see. So he said, but that doesn't mean he should hit me. It's like, well, that's true too. So I could feel this kid who was difficult. And I wouldn't say he was troubled, but he definitely had a lot of energy. But I felt he had a good heart. Not like it was my opinion or I wanted him to. It was something I either picked up on or I just, was just there. Or God said, listen, for his sake, think that he has a good heart, which is also a very good piece of advice. So I said, all right, listen, when someone says your parents are worms or snails or whatever it is, and if you don't happen to agree with them, sorry, that's terrible. Anyway, then, just come to me and say, he said this bad thing, and don't hit him. Because if you hit him, you're in deep trouble because you are not allowed to hit at this school. But if you don't hit him, then he's in trouble. And it always ended up being the same kid, the snail collar kid. It was always between these same two. He's in trouble. Isn't that what you want? He's the one being mean, and he's hurting with words, which are just as hurtful or worse. So, but you can't hit. So just tell me, he said this, and then I'll deal with him. And so he said, oh, okay. So then, the next time something happened, he was running like, he said, I don't know, my parents are caterpillars, and just like, I'm going to hit him. Just say, better try to stop me. I'm trying to not hit him. And it was excellent. He learned how, I said, run around screaming. Just do something with that energy, but don't hit. And so, anyway, I say that because, again, it's like the cardinal rule in school, you're not supposed to hit. And yet, there was a lot of goodness in him where it could be so tempting to just say, criminal, go to jail, and be put away and out of my sight. But that wasn't who he was inside. And so I made that comment earlier joking, but it is a good idea to think that, well, everybody has a good heart. And if they don't, then something must have happened. I mean, who wakes up in the day, with the sun shining? Well, maybe not in May. It reminds me of a friend of ours in India when we were talking to them. They said, I said, what's the weather like? Oh, it's gray, overcast, you can't see the sun, cloudy, it's a beautiful day. And I paused for a moment because, in America that's a horrible day because it means cold. But here it means cooler because the sun is obscured. So anyway, it is, no one wakes up in the morning and just sort of having a happy time and then just says, oh, I think I'm going to be good and nasty today and I'm going to enjoy it so much. It's usually because of some pain, something there. And so in any case, if we can't, we can also practice our compassion from a distance and just sort of, om and bless them from afar. Now, it's important to remember too, as Krishna says, it's amazing in the Gita, he says, steadfastly a lamp burns, sheltered by the wind. Now, you could take that to mean that when you meditate, you should have a lamp and you should, shelter it from the wind. And that's true. It's perfectly fine to meditate with a candle. A candle can be very helpful. And you can even concentrate on the flame if you want to. Of course, after a while, you can concentrate inwardly. You can visualize a flame when you meditate. In some techniques of meditation, they do that, and so on. So in other words, there are deeper meanings, but it's not to ignore the superficial meaning. Master said a scripture should be helpful on all levels of man's reality, spiritual, emotional, and physical. And Swamiji was a little surprised when he heard that a scripture should help you physically. I mean, we have, diet books for that or something like that. We don't need a scripture necessarily to give us physical advice, but Master was saying, no, it should be. And one of the reasons why is simply because it's a part of our nature. If you're sick all the time, it's hard to meditate. And if your body isn't well, it's a constant burden. Now, if you are fighting against that, and it's a part of the way you're working your karma out, fine. But as Swamiji said, any part of us that we try to shove away or ignore eventually returns to us somewhat indignant. Just like, oh, you're going to ignore me? Okay, how about this? And then our body drops, and then we have to now pay attention. And so it is true that we could meditate with a lamp. Obviously, it's not required, though, just to be clear. But steadfastly a lamp burns sheltered from the wind, just as it says, so should the yogi's mind be. And so we say, okay, well, if you have a flame that's not in the wind, then it's steady, and that's how my mind should be. And the only problem is that when we try to meditate, the flame of our mind goes like this. Anyway. And it's like, no, it's supposed to be like this, and now it's like this. It means I failed. It does not mean that you failed. One of the easiest obstacles in meditation is that we try to control the thoughts. Fine, I will control the thoughts. Oh, I failed to control my thoughts. I have failed in meditation. Listen, it's a long journey. It's a long process, and you don't know all that is happening that's beneficial just by judging it, on whatever superficial things seem to be happening. If you learn to tie your shoes, you tie your shoes and you can more or less do it, and you don't get nervous every time. Okay, I'm going to make it this time. You just do it. But therefore, when you have this thing with the thoughts not controlling them, then it's like, I wanted to do it, I decided to do it, and I failed at doing it. It was too hard. But it's not the same. You can't judge it that way. It's not a simple task. And remember, if nothing else, the day that Sri Yukteswarji gave Samadhi to Master, remember, Master was meditating before that with a restless mind. He said, my noble purpose, that of meditating, was unshared by restless thoughts. They scattered like birds before the hunter. And when Sri Yukteswar called to him, basically saying, Mukunda, which was his birth name, and Master was meditating, Mukunda! And then, Master is just sitting there. Master should not bother me when he knows why I came to his room to meditate. And Sri Yukteswar is basically saying, Mukunda, Samadhi, come and get it. That's really what he was about to do, was give him some, no, don't bother me, I'm meditating. And then he said, he said, sir, I am meditating. And Sri Yukteswar said, I know how you are meditating with your mind distributed like leaves in a storm. come to me. And so Master writes, snubbed and exposed. But then Sri Yukteswarji touched him on the heart and he went into Samadhi forever. So we can't know that. It doesn't mean every time we have restless thoughts we're ready for Samadhi. But on the other hand, it doesn't mean that if we have restless thoughts that we're so far from deeper changes in our lives. The only way you can judge your meditation, which in fact Sri Yukteswarji said, is by a growing sense or expanding sense of God's joy or God's love in your heart. And some people feel that easily, some people don't. And if you don't, then all you have to do is say, have I changed since I've started meditating? A friend of mine was explaining how he joined Ananda and his parents were, a little questioning, just like, well, let's see, this is the new place you joined, and so that's very nice, and what will it be after this one? Just kind of teasing him a little bit because he had been on a journey of sort of serial ashrams, one after the other, and so on. Serial meaning in a row, not a serial ashram. Okay. So, and so then he had to have the greatest spiritual test there is, which was to visit a difficult relative. And I mean that because remember when Buddha said to one of his disciples who said, sir, I am flowing with God, and he said, wonderful, why don't you go home and visit your parents? And it's not sarcastic. It's like, look, if you can keep it together then you've got something. And so similarly, they said, we're going to go to the, Mr. X's house, whatever relative that was, the baddest of the bad. And this relative, let's call him an uncle, sat there and just criticized my friend for 2 hours straight in front of his mom, in front of his own family, in front of guests who didn't even know him. And my friend, who had meditated beforehand, felt and had prayed like, we're going to see Mr. X or Uncle X, and you know what he's like, so help me. And he felt such a joy in that persisted throughout the experience, that then when he was in the experience, he just still felt the joy. And he was not afraid, but he was concerned if he should say, oh yes, and what about you? Then that he might lose that joy. So in order to hang on to the joy, he just said, Ama, Shetty, yes. Very good, yes, very true. And his mom, went, okay, I think maybe this new ashram has something for it, because if you can handle that, then something you're doing must be working. As Sister Gyanamata said, we have to test our religion in the cold light of day. And usually that means, the common interpretation of that is that we can't just be spiritual and then nasty. We can't be, I love to practice the yamas, but I don't mind cheating a little bit here. After all, everyone does it. We have to test. The way we act is really that comes from how we really feel. We sometimes use the phrase, people vote with their feet. Meaning if they like it, their feet bring them to it. And if they don't like it, no matter how much they say, yes, 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 I love it, but somehow I have an appointment and my feet carry me elsewhere. People vote with their feet. So it doesn't mean all in favor. So, on the other hand, another way to understand test your religion in the cold light of day is sort of the inverse. You know how well you're doing by seeing how you do in the cold light of day. In other words, if you're improving in your patience, if you're improving in your buoyancy of spirit, if you're finding it easier to listen, if that was a need of yours, then you say, okay, I must be growing. If you find it easier to speak up, if that was a need of yours, you can say, all right, I can see that I'm growing. And if you can't see anything, then ask someone who knows you and likes you if they see any change, because that's very often, just as my friend's mother saw, there was a change. He went through a very difficult test and came out fine. And so she could, therefore, in that cold light of day, it's obviously the hot light of day here, but that she could see that his meditation was working. It reminds me though of a friend of mine, I think it was Haridasji who told me someone came to him and he was a Kriyaban or he was meditating, and then he said something like, well, the people in your office, probably, he said, why don't you meditate at work? He said, no, I don't want them to see me meditating. And he said, well, you can disguise it in certain ways. He said, no, I don't want them to know that I meditate. And Haridasji said, well, why is that? He said, then their expectations of me will be too high. And so I've never heard that one before. It's like I want to still get away with it, whatever else I'm doing. So the other thing to keep in mind, though, about steadfastly the lamp burns, sheltered from the wind. And we were saying the mind flame flickers. Anyway, well, it isn't sheltered from the wind. Because the wind, of course, in the body is the breath. And it isn't that breathing disturbs the mind only, but the breathing, it's really the thoughts that disturb the mind. But there's a hint then in that. How do we would love to say, steadfastly the mind focuses, sheltered from those crazy thoughts. But it doesn't say sheltered from the thoughts, it says sheltered from the wind. Why? Because one of the ways that we're able to control the thoughts is through the breath. That's the great secret the yogis have given us for meditation, is that if we just say control the mind, well, it's very difficult because we're trying to concentrate with the thing that doesn't want to concentrate also. So it's hard to work with the mind directly. But if we instead concentrate on the breath, the wind, then the thoughts have no choice but to follow. The thoughts, the mind, and the energy are all tied and bound. I don't know, they're not torn. They're bound together. These three things, energy, thoughts, and mind. And the word for energy, of course, is prana. The word for thoughts is also prana, and the word for breath is also prana in some contexts, because they're all one thing. And so instead, if we either concentrate on controlling our breath through pranayama, then the mind will also follow. Or if we concentrate on the breath directly, then without trying to control it, as we do in the Hong Sa technique, for example, then the mind will cooperate. It has no choice. It's tied to these other two. And so for example, even these level 1 techniques, which are the cornerstone of Master's teachings, Hong Sa is, again, calming the mind by focusing on the breath. But also, there is the energization exercises. And because when we raise our energy, then we have energy to concentrate with, and then also the mind is calmed by higher energy. We might think at first, well, if I raise my energy, then it kind of makes me, even more agitated. And we say, well, how did you raise your energy? It's like, well, 4 cups of coffee. So, okay, yeah, that's true. If you raise your energy in certain ways, it gets higher and outward. But if you raise your energy higher and take it inward, then it's not restless. But again, it takes high energy for the mind to be calm. And when we have low energy, it is not only less, but also sort of spread out throughout the body. It's also kind of, we're agitated because we don't feel that good. So even if, you know how it is when you have a headache or some kind of pain, you try to stay cheerful, but that pain is constantly kind of gnawing away at your happiness unless you find a way. Sometimes it's helpful if you have physical discomfort to put your mind here and try to concentrate here, and in that way try to withdraw a little bit from the pain. If it's a headache, it's tricky, especially if the headache is here. But still, to try to concentrate here and have that distance. Yogananda gave a demonstration of that once. They were moving a very heavy wishing well. I think it was like 1 ton. They were all carrying it to move it, and somehow they dropped it, and it landed on Master's foot and crushed his foot. And his face automatically just winced with pain. And his foot was broken. And he said, I will show you something. And he said, now I will put my mind here. And then he could stand up straight and he could walk on his broken foot completely fine. Then he said, now I'll put my mind back in the body. And instantly the tension, the pain appeared to his face. And then he said, and now I'll put my concentration here. And it just vanished like, smoke blown away from a flame, and then he could walk and be very natural. And then he repeated this a few times to show them, not look at the control I have, but look at the control you can have. Concentrate here, it's just the body, and kept it distant. On the other hand, I like to think that when he showed the pain that was there when he had it, to say, look, it's understandable that we're going to go through pains. The human body does suffer. He didn't just say, I am above it. In fact, I shall materialize a healed foot. What are you crying about? You know? If we don't see the masters have any struggle, then all we do is just clap for them and weep for ourselves. And so when we see instead they have lots of struggle, we say, that's a lesson I can use because I have struggles too. So keep that in mind too, that that's what they're here for, is to show us how to improve our lot. And why? Because they got free themselves the same way. They started out just like we are and became free. And so it isn't that God just said, as Master said, you know, that Yogananda is to be Yogananda and Al Capone is to be Al Capone, which he was a very famous gangster who killed lots of people. And if God just created a villain and created a saint, then it would be very unfair. You know, we all have these chances and to grow, and as long as we want. And so you will end up free in the end. You have no choice. And so let's get going right now. Let's get started. Remember also, Krishna says, be thou, be thou a yogi. And I'm smiling. This is actually the smiling memory that I meant to tell at the beginning. I was at Ananda Village in the late 1990s, and there was a yoga teacher training class. And so people will come from all over the country and come to Ananda Village and learn the Ananda Yoga, Ananda Hatha Yoga system. It's called Ananda Yoga, but referring to yoga postures. But as part of what they're doing, and a lot of, some of the people coming are thinking primarily in terms of physical benefits of Hatha Yoga. Though, of course, for them to be interested in Ananda Yoga, they already are sort of tuning into the subtler aspects, because you can take a more physical course, and this is both physical, spiritual, and obviously more. And so the part of their education, this is near the end of their course, and learning about it is yoga, and we're doing yoga, and very good. Oh, there's some Sanskrit words also, and this is older, and there's other things besides, asanas, and so then one evening, Gyandev and his wife, Nayaswami Gyandev and Nayaswami Diksha, did a portrayal of the Bhagavad Gita. And Diksha had been a very well-trained dancer in her youth. And Gyandev was reading from the Gita, and she had choreographed a dance, to certain of the slokas and so on, and interpretations and all. It's very, very inspiring to watch. And then he concluded with, "Be thou, O Arjuna." And of course he was saying everything right. Be thou, O Arjuna, a yogi. And then this one woman turned to me and said, "It doesn't really say that, does it? I mean, be thou a yogi, that's like what we're doing. We're doing like yoga, and I mean, he just said that, right? It's not written in there. I guess it doesn't make any sense to you because you know it says written in there. But she was thinking in terms of yoga. It was like, be thou a yoga student or something, or practice thou chandrasana. It was too specific to what they were doing for her to think that Krishna would actually say even the word yogi, because she was just thinking of it in such a narrow context. And a very amusing story that perhaps I should just keep to myself. But in any case, remember that that's what he says. Be thou a yogi. Why? And again, it doesn't mean that yoga is the highest path and all these things. The highest path is the path that will take you the highest. That's the highest path. And that path changes from time to time. But we spend a lot of time thinking about our suffering. And you could call that Shankya philosophy. There's just this really, I don't like it. It hurts, this existence. And then we spend a lot of time, and then we also might be enjoying it too. It hurts until we get the ice cream, but then the ice cream wears off, and then it hurts again. Or we might be thinking, yes, all is Brahma and all these things, and so that's nice to know. And I can say all is Brahma, but I'm noticing it still hurts. And I'm also noticing that the joy, as Master said, that I can get out of ice cream is only this much. And then it passes. And somehow I want more. And then we come to the bridge between the need to get out of Maya, what it will look like when we get out of Maya, to how to get out of Maya. And that is what yoga is for. Sankhya is our need for it. Vedanta is what it will look like when we're finally done, which is nice to know. But again, the yogi becomes impatient. It's wonderful to know all these things, but I have not experienced them. And it's not even enough to know that they have experienced them. I want to experience them too. And so teach me how to experience them. And that's why Krishna says, find God, be thou a yogi. God bless you.